and then Malcolm will join us as he arrives. Like I said, I'm sure that he's probably having a technical problem because I was just on the phone with him shortly before this. So we do have a quorum. We'll declare the quorum. So we get the meeting started. Are there any additions to the agenda? Oh, there we go. Hey, Malcolm. Are there any additions to the agenda? Oh, are we broadcasting before I keep going? Can we verify that we're broadcasting?
You're live.
Thank you. So then we will move to the approval of the minutes for the open and closed meetings on September 9th, 2021 that has been distributed already. Did anyone have any additions, deletions, or corrections to those minutes? Seeing none, do I have a motion to approve them as presented?
Motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
So we have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
It passes unanimously. So now we move on to the administrator's report, and I'd like to just remind everyone reporting just to give us the highlights and not recite, please, what we already have in writing, but to an essence of expediency. So who is starting on the report?
Good afternoon, Nikki Charlson. Before I start, did you want to mention under new business the presentation by the Maryland Association of Election Officials?
I was assuming that was under new business.
Yes, I'm just confirming that. Okay.
Did you want to talk about that now, or do we want to just wait?
No, I just wanted to make sure that if we had any members of the Maryland Association of Election Officials listening, that they knew that it was under new business. That's all.
Yeah, it's under new business. Right.
Okay, thanks.
Okay,
So I'll refer you to the administrator's report for announcements and important information, and go down to election reform and management and see if Jen is on the line and would like to give an update on any of her projects. Okay, not sure she's on. So you have there her updates. Lots of work happening in the mail-in voting area with usability, review going on, and implementing legislation. I wanted to announce that we have selected a vendor for the ballot mailing contract. We have done our internal selection and go before the Board of Public Works, and we have selected Taylor Communications, which for those of you that were around last year, that name should sound familiar. They were the vendor that actually printed and mailed our mail-in ballot packets for the general election. We did our competitive procurement, got proposals from 6 vendors who were susceptible for award, and the evaluation committee selected Taylor. So we'll keep you posted on that as it progresses through the Board of Public Works process. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mary.
Great, thank you, Nikki. So really quickly, development within the statewide voter registration database, also known as MD Voters. We have a December release, and in that release, it will finalize the requirements for the permanent mail-in ballot application. And it will also deal with MVA's new driver's license system configurations. So MVA is coming out with a whole new driver's license system, and we have to make sure that MD voters, they can talk to each other and capture all that information. I'm very happy to announce that Maine is the latest member in ERIC. So that brings us up to 31 states and the District of Columbia. I encourage anybody who's interested to go to ERIC's website, which is ericstates, which is plural.org, for more information. But that just allows us to continue the excellent list maintenance that we do in Maryland. The last thing I would like to report on, which I know, Bill, has been near and dear to your heart, is SBE in conjunction with MVA has been working on data comparison. And we have two reports that we're receiving. One is when an individual when a Maryland voter resident surrenders their license in another state, we get that information. We take the active voter registration list and compare it with that. They send back that information, and then we're able to reach out to individuals to say, can you verify this? So with that report, bear with me, I just want to make sure, we sent out 4,948 letters for those individuals that are registered in Maryland, but surrendered their licenses in another state. The other report comparison that we did was taking Maryland's inactive registration list and comparing those addresses to what MVA has in their database. And that yielded, bear with me, 1,915 letters. Those letters were sent to the address that MVA has. So again, those individuals can update their information. So I don't have any great information as to the return rate. We just wanted to get this process started. But from August 15th, 2021 through October 25th, 2021, where we think those were the mailings, were dropping and being returned. We did have approximately 1,010 cancellations that we think are due to that. Moving forward, we plan on doing this quarterly with MVA. And we are also going to set up a unique identifier for these mailings so that we can provide better statistics. And
I have a
I was
question.
going to say the next mailing is going to go out at the beginning of December.
That's great. I have a question, and I'm trying to just get my arms around, and I know it's new, so we're trying to figure out how to do it. You know what I mean? What the best way to do it is. But if there's 4,948 verified where they have, through this MVA, that they've canceled their Maryland license because they've gotten one in a different state. And you're not allowed legally to have a driver's license in two states in this country, right?
That I do not know, Bill. I will defer that to Andrea. That's not under my purview.
Well, either way, and we can ask Andrea, but if they've moved their license to another state and we mail them something and it either comes back or nothing happens, what happens to their record?
Sure. So great question, Bill. So if that is returned as undeliverable, then they follow the MVRA, the National Voter Registration Act, where they would become inactive. And then if we don't get any kind of update whatsoever, then they fall into that, will be canceled after two, and not voting after two federal elections. So it still allows us to do great list maintenance.
But if it doesn't come back, what happens?
Right. So what we're doing is being very proactive with list maintenance, but there's nothing under federal or state law that gives us the authority to do anything additional with this information if we don't hear from the voter themselves.
That's interesting. I mean, because as an example, I have, there's mail that comes here to my house and somebody who lived here and the forwarding is over And, I'm not going to walk back out to the mailbox with a pen every time and say return to sender, right? So it just gets delivered and goes in the trash can. So, but we have a governmental document that says that they've gotten a license, which means they reside in a different state. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what to do with it. I'm just trying to, I'm talking out loud here a little bit that, it seems that there could be something else because we have official information, not speculative information. But I don't, I guess we'll have to think about that. I don't know if any other board members have any thoughts on that. I guess not. So, Andrea, can you answer that question? Do you know if it is legal to hold driver's licenses in more than one state?
I don't know the answer to that. I suspect different states have different thresholds or standards for who is eligible to obtain a license. It would surprise me if you could in some states, but at the same time, I just don't know the answer.
Okay, I'm going to look into that a little bit more. Thank you. Thank you, Mary, for that's awesome information. Thank you so much for making that happen.
You're more than welcome. Thank you.
I guess now it's Mary, are you done?
We lost her.
I'm done. I'm sorry.
I just wanted to make sure before so on the Candidacy and Campaign Finance division here, candidate filings are by appointment and moving along. We have 155 so far that have filed at SBE. We have the next report that is due for disclosure purposes is due November 30th, and that's the semi-annual disclosure statement for any persons doing business with a government entity of $200,000 or more, or a person that employs a state lobbyist and makes contributions of $500 or more in a filing period. So we'll be getting those statements in throughout November. We have on the public financing front, one on the state level, one candidate ticket has filed a notice of intent to participate in the program. So this is the third consecutive election where a candidate has filed to participate, and if they qualify, then we'll have 3 in a row of qualifyings as well. And this is new and exciting because this is under the new matching program that was passed this year in the General Assembly. So it mirrors similarly to the county programs with a tiered approach that gives small dollar a greater match, and then as it gets closer to $250, less of a match. So it's modeled after the county's Montgomery and Howard approach. I have reported on all the enforcement actions and who's paid in the report. And then just to give a little bit about that, I was in the Bahamas for their September 16th parliamentary elections. The entire parliament was up, all 39 seats, and it was they had to deal with COVID and quarantining. And so it definitely posed a lot of challenges for election officials dealing with the pandemic there. Additionally, they had a nationwide curfew of 9 p.m. Throughout my time there. So that was interesting to see, like, everything just shutting down well before 9 o'clock so that everyone can be in their house by 9. It had definitely an effect on their turnout, which was low in comparison to their other elections because it was only in the upper 70 percentiles, whereas they're usually in the 80 to 90 range for that. And so I'll be happy to talk about that offline with any of you. It was a fun and exciting mission, and I always like to go on them because I learned a lot about how other countries deal with very similar issues that face us, and see how what transpires if things go to the logical conclusion For example, in the Bahamas, there is no public financing nor any campaign finance disclosure of any kind. So it's kind of always on rumor and innuendo about who's financing what and everything, rather than having facts. And the use of social media in those elections is paramount as well, because they kind of, the disinformation and misinformation that can get spread quickly. So it's stuff that is it's common across the globe, certain issues that confront election officials. And with that, I'll turn it over to I think
Jared, I
Shafiq.
have one question. Are candidates allowed to campaign and run prior to filing and as a candidate and prior to filing their financial statements?
In Maryland, yes, they can declare publicly what office they want to seek and go out and campaign. They basically they're just not appearing on the ballot, but they can raise money for that office and seek it. So the difference is in Maryland, when they raise money, you're giving it to the candidate, not for the candidate for a specific office. So they can change their mind and run for delegate, state senate, even county council. Basically, it's the same account. It runs from county all the way through state and constitutional offices. So and city as well. So only for the Democrat and Republican primary, they have to make sure that they're filed by the last Tuesday in February to be appearing on the ballot.
Okay,
Good question.
thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jared. Who's next?
Is Shafiq on the line, or Fred? Any highlights for mock election and poll book printers, or you want to just refer to what's in the report?
I'm here, Nikki. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. Good afternoon. So yeah, just a couple quick highlights from the voting system division. So as Nikki stated, first starting with the mock election. So we are currently executing a statewide mock election. So all 24 local boards are participating. The primary focus areas for this mock election is doing an end-to-end testing of our agency election management system known as AIMS. And we also, not only while testing that, to make sure that the features and functionality are working as expected, but it also gives the opportunity to the local boards to get acclimated to the new system and environment as well. Another focus area for the mock election will be the logic and accuracy testing process. With the implementation of ballot styles by precinct, the local boards test decks for logic and accuracy are going to increase substantially. So much so that we needed to test some new procedures for testing to mitigate some of the concerns about the amount of time that it will take for testing. So because of those two critical areas and applications for the actual execution of elections, we're doing a statewide mock. Right now, we are doing the logic and accuracy testing phase, and so far all is well. We did ballot proofing previously, again, to test the AIMS functionality, and that was successful as well. Our goal and expectation is to wrap up and complete the mock election by December of this year. The other area is poll book printers. So we're on the Board of Public Works meeting back on the 15th of September. Our solicitation to procure new poll book printers was approved. This is a statewide replacement of poll book printers. So we are procuring a little more than 7,500 printers. These printers have already been deployed in a number of local boards previously, and they do work with the current poll book, and we will make sure that it works with new solution as well. Due to the global supply chain shortage of parts and materials, we are going to be implementing these poll books through a series of deliveries. So we're expecting 5 deliveries. The first delivery of 700 has already been received this month, with future deliveries set to begin December through April. Our expectation is to have them out to the local boards, acceptance tested and ready for the 2022 election cycle by the end of April.
Great. Are there any questions from the board? Thank you very much for that report, Shafiq. And who do we move to next?
Good afternoon. This is Keith Ross with the Project Management Office. I just wanted to first, as presented in writing, the report for the Project Management Office, and if there are any questions, willing to go over them. But I would like to highlight that we have, during this period, completed the competitive procurement for the Pogo solution and had selected Dentech, a Virginia-based company, to implement the new Pogo solution. The second major thing is that we will be implementing the Pogo solution in time for the 2024 election cycle, as opposed to what was 2022. The team is now preparing to enter, we still have to go to the Board of Public Works, of course, but the team is preparing to enter into the implementation phase, in which, it's everyone will be working with the vendor in order to have a successful implementation in 2024. If there are any questions, please ask.
Any questions from anyone on the board? Thank you very much. And do we have any other presenters?
Yeah, so the last section of the report is information security. So under prior board policy, you all have asked for a quarterly security briefing. And so Art is going to present that now.
Thank you.
Before you start, let me just say to the board that if you have certain questions cannot be answered in public meeting. So certainly if you have questions and you ask that question and Art says he can't answer that here, we're going to have to go to closed meeting anyway. It would be no problem to reconvene that in closed meeting under that reason as well. So feel like you can ask whatever question, but you may not get that answer in this open session. So I just wanted to run some cover there for you, Art, so that they didn't think you were being rude.
Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate that. Just to give you an overview, details are in the report, but we are continuing to build our information security program, especially to anticipate a lot of the cyber threats that have been evolving over the past year and that we're anticipating over this next year as we move into the 2022 election cycle. So that includes a number of initiatives. Many of these are ongoing, such as updating our cybersecurity policies and detailed standards for systems. A lot of this gets very detailed and very geeky. I'm sure it's exciting for all of you, but this is really where the rubber hits the road, is getting down into the details of making sure our systems are secure and resilient. And SBIT has made some incredible strides along those lines in terms of further securing those systems. So we're implementing additional training and managed security services to enhance detection and response capabilities. We've been conducting ongoing audits, assessments. We are increasing penetration testing to test our compliance and also improve our cybersecurity posture. We're increasing the use of tabletop exercises as well to train our teams and assess readiness. Also, we have been leveraging social media defense and are adding some additional vendor supply chain security tools, just additional ways to, in this emerging threat landscape that we're in, additional ways for us to help secure our overall posture. In addition to that, I have to mention the partnerships that we have with CISA, DHS, FBI, local boards. The resources that we have there are phenomenal, and we've been taking advantage of those wherever we can to help us improve our posture. So, any questions?
Any questions from the board?
Okay.
Don't see any questions, Art. So I appreciate you and what you do. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I believe that's the end. Is there anything else, Nikki, to report, or is that the end of the report?
That's the end of the report. Thank you.
Great. So we will move on to the Assistant Attorney General's report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, everybody. Couple updates in some of our current matters and a new matter to present. The first one on our list is Fusaro versus Davitt. We had arguments. This, I'm sure you'll all recall, but this is the case brought by Dennis Fusaro, who is challenging the restrictions on access to the voter list in Maryland. First, he challenged Maryland's registered voter requirement. But as a result of the Judicial Watch case, that became something that we had to provide Mr. Fusaro the list, notwithstanding the fact that he is not a Maryland registered voter. Next, however, he's challenging the requirement that in order to obtain the list, one must swear an oath that they will not use the list for a purpose not related to the electoral process. He's challenging that as violating his rights under the First Amendment to speak however he wishes using this list that he is entitled to. He's challenging it as vague because he claims that he has no understanding what electoral process means in this context and therefore can't alter his behavior accordingly. The appeal was heard by the Fourth Circuit on September 23rd, and we are waiting for a decision in that case. The next matter is the National Federation of the Blind case, which I'm pleased to report will not be the subject of future updates because on September 24th, 2021, the parties submitted a joint stipulation of dismissal in that case. So that case is over. As you all know, there was a settlement that was agreed to by the parties. That settlement was approved by the Board of Public Works on September 1st. The settlement check was paid, and that gave rise to the dismissal. The next matter is the Chong Soo-Yi versus Hogan cases. This too, barring further activity by Mr. Yi, should not be the subject of future updates because on October 5th, 2021, the Court of Special Appeals issued a per curiam opinion affirming the dismissal of the case. You'll recall that this was a case brought by an individual in Montgomery County challenging a whole bunch of aspects of the 2018 elections, including the use of scanners to tabulate ballots, the use of religious institutions as as polling places, and among other things, the identification of party affiliations on the ballot in the general election ballots. Finally, the WinRed case that is still ongoing. This is a case brought by WinRed is a fundraising organization affiliated with the Republican Party. WinRed brought suit against 4 attorneys general, including the Attorney General of Maryland, regarding investigations that those attorneys general were conducting into the use by WinRed of pre-checked recurring payment boxes on solicitations for donations. That case is the subject of a motion for preliminary injunction by WinRed, asking the federal court to enjoin those investigations, and a motion to dismiss by the defendants, asking the court to dismiss the complaint. The arguments on those motions are scheduled for November 2nd, 2021. The case is pending in federal court in Minnesota, and the arguments will take place remotely via Zoom. Finally, the new matter is Connors versus State of Maryland. It's a challenge to Maryland's voter list, availability of the voter list coming from the opposite direction as the Fusaro case. In this case, the plaintiff is alleging that the availability of the voter list itself and all of the voter information that is provided with the voter list violates several state and federal laws, including but not limited to the Maryland Public Information Act, the FOIA, the voter list access statute itself, the First, Fourth, Fifth, and 14th Amendments of the U.S. Constitution and constitutes torts such as negligence, invasion of privacy, and discrimination. The plaintiff is seeking, among other things, damages in the amount of $400,000 for each instance the voter information of the particular plaintiff was disclosed on a voter list sent to an applicant. It's also seeking injunctive relief in the form of an order forbidding the Board of Elections from disclosing voter information in the future without obtaining the affirmative consent of individuals before doing so. The plaintiff is also asking the the court to order the Board of Elections to issue new voter ID numbers to every Maryland registered voter. The complaint was filed on September 23rd, and the defendant's response is due November 8th. The defendants in the case are the state of Maryland, the state administrator of elections, Ms. Lamone, and Governor Hogan. Unless there are any questions, that concludes my report.
Andrea, Mr. Chairman, I have a quick question. Andrea, is in the Connor's case, is the plaintiff represented by counsel or is this pro se?
The plaintiff is not represented by counsel.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I think you might be muted.
I sure am. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. So let me ask again, are there any questions remaining for the Assistant Attorney General? Seeing none, we move on to our number 6 on our agenda, the approval of proposed changes to COMAR. And I believe we have both the memorandum and those proposed changes that were sent out to the board. Who will be handling this?
This is Tracy. I'm going to be starting.
Great.
Hi, everyone. Good to see you all. In front of you, you have the memo from Nikki and I from October 14th. And then as well as you have the actual changes to the regulations. I'm going to take the first 2 regulations here, which are both in 33010101. And I will also say before I start that for all of the regs presented today, these were presented to the election directors, and all of their comments have been incorporated into the version that you're looking at. So the first proposed change is really just a correction. In section B22B, there had been a previous additional definition added, which changed the numeration of the subsections there, the 22. And there was a reference in 22B that referenced the paragraph, and that reference had never been changed. I noticed that when I was looking for something else. So I just wanted to correct that while we were making some other changes. The second proposed amendment is, again, 310101B, section 26AIX. In this proposed change, it updates the acceptable documents that you can show to prove your residency, specifically for students that are at independent Maryland colleges and universities. Students who are at a public college or university can show a document from their school because that is considered a government document. Students that are at a private education institution cannot do that. So what this change does here is really just bring fairness to students that are in private institutions. That way they can register to vote using the same documentation that a student at a public institution can
do. Those are the 2 you're going to start with, right? We're just
correct. Are there any questions on those?
Are there questions on the first, just the first 2? And under your memorandum, it would be number 1 and number 2. So we're just dealing with those two. Is there any questions on number 1 and number 2? Changes to COMAR. And if I'm not correct, this is the first, these are proposed regulations. They have not been published. Is that correct?
Correct. They will be submitted to DSD and ALR after this for what's approved and published in a few weeks, depending on the schedule.
Are there any comments or questions on number 1 and number 2? I'd like to deal with these as we go through, I think, because I have some questions on the next one. So if there's no questions on these, is there somebody who would like to make a motion to approve as presented the proposed changes in 33.01.01.01B 22B and 31.01.01.01B 26A IX?
So moved.
So we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor of the changes for the aforementioned 2 areas of COMAR, please signify by saying aye.
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 I don't see any nays, so it approves as presented. And now we move on to number 3, canvassing. Who is presenting that?
So I will be presenting the rest.
Okay.
So and number 3 on your memo is proposing a change to 33080404. And what this does is it gives a local board discretion to allow a canvassing team to darken in an oval that is humanly visible, but may not be picked up by the scanning machine. And this formalizes the process that the local boards have been doing and puts it into regulation. Again, it's discretionary by the local board. And this darkening of this visibly light shade would be done in a public canvas like everything else, right? That would be reviewed and it's in an open canvas.
So so we're dealing with just number 3. Are there any questions about or comments on number 3, which is dealing with 33.08.04.04? So I have a little pushback here and some questions. I'm uncomfortable with a canvassing team making a decision without a local board actually voting on what that action should be as a board of canvassers. I know, having been involved in that many times, that there'll be sometimes 52-person teams, hopefully bipartisan, and it's a lot going on, and I am concerned about giving that 2-person team the ability to make a mark or make an adjustment of any type to a actual physical ballot. I don't know how. I would feel better about it if it had to go to the canvassing team first, the actual board of canvassers, and the board of canvassers said it was okay. I still prefer it to be duplicated because then you still have the original, and were there to be a challenge to that ballot, you would have the original marked as, the new one is a duplicate and the old one is duplicated, the original, to be used in court for a challenge. I don't know. Nikki, are you saying that there's some boards that are already doing this?
That's our understanding. And just to point out that it's not the sole decision of the 2-person canvassing board. The proposed regs require that an election director or that director's designee is part of that process, that the 3 individuals are making that decision that, yes, there's a mark here, it's just too light and we're going to darken it in. So it's more than just the 2-member canvassing team. Just wanted to make that clarification.
Nikki, suppose there is a challenge to that, and you don't have the original to show that it was a valid marking. I can see the chairman's concern there, because what you have done, you have actually marked up the originals, so there's no question in the event there's a challenge whether this was a valid marking or not. Is there some that, I don't know, a whole new ballot can be used and say it's a duplicate ballot and you have the original in the event that there is a challenge to that?
So a couple things. So the time for the challenge would be when that ballot is being reviewed. Once it gets into the scanner, we are unable to pull out any ballot at that point, right? We can't say that is the ballot challenge and pull it out. So it would be happening while that review is going on. So that could be when the challenge is, and in which case then the board could set up a different procedure for doing that for the challenge. And I'm sorry, I forgot the second part of your question.
Well, I didn't know there was a second
Well,
part.
duplicating the ballots, right? Duplicating the ballots is a time-consuming process. And again, if the challenge is happening at the time this is being darkened, that's the appropriate time, and you can resolve it then and there, and then the ballot can be scanned. The duplication process, and that's why the local boards have set up this process so that they don't have to duplicate ballots, where it's very clear from looking at it what the voter intended. It's just not dark enough to be seen.
Any other
Well,
board?
I understand. I'm just looking.
Any other board members have comments or questions? Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Yeah, I'm just gonna say again that I'm uneasy about this regulation. Having never done it like this, and having been in, I think there's just too much of a chance of misinterpretation across potentially, like I said, the canvasses I've been involved with, a dozen or 50 or more canvasses over the years where I was on the board of canvassers. And I think there's too much of a chance of misinterpretation on, was it a little mark or was it their intent to vote? And it seems to me that that is the intention of that Maryland law has set up a board of canvassers to make those decisions. And that should not be those decisions should not be delegated to a canvassing team that's opening and processing ballots. That's my opinion. I don't know if any other board members disagree, and I'm happy to hear other ideas on that. I'm not certainly not closed-minded on the issue. I just I have no peace about it. I can tell you that.
Mr. Chairman, I have a
Are you
question.
calling?
Sure. Yes. Go ahead, Ms. Woodward.
Okay. So what happens right now? I mean, if this, what is the current process? If something is too light to be, if the mark is too light to be scanned, what happens to that ballot? Is it discarded? I think you're muted, Nikki.
Sorry.
Yeah.
It will be counted. Some counties will scan it through as is and determine and let the scanner count it or not. And other counties will darken it in and then send it through the scanner, knowing that the darkened one will be seen.
I can tell you, Ms. Woodward, what was done in the county that I was involved with is that if there was any debate about any issue like that, it went to the Board of Canvassers, which is a appointed board, sworn in appointed board. They would make a decision, then send that out to be duplicated. What these counties are doing is they're trying to circumvent that process of actually duplicating the ballot, which leaves you the original and the duplicated ballot for inspection. And I've just never been a part of it like that, and I'm not finding peace in that process. There's too many people involved.
Oh, so maybe what I could propose is that we just table this particular regulation, proposed change. And we can go back to the local boards and talk with them about it. Is there a way that it can be referred to the board, which is what the chairman's suggestion is, or anybody else's suggestions, and just leave it tabled for now and come back and revisit it at a future meeting.
Is everybody okay with that?
I personally think it makes sense to revisit the issue based upon the concerns that have been raised today. I also think that, needless to say, the scrutiny over every action taken with respect to a ballot in the canvassing process, et cetera, we don't want to we don't want to put something into a regulation that somehow allows more challenges to the work that's being done. So I think maybe taking it back, looking at it one more time fresh, and coming back to us, I think that makes sense. And it certainly seems to be what Mr. Chair, our chairman is interested in.
Okay, so why don't we do this by motion? Is there a motion to table this for reconsideration by the staff?
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Great. Is there a
Second.
second? Then it's
Second.
moved and seconded. All those in favor to table
Aye.
number 3?
Aye.
Aye.
Unanimously tabled. Thank you, Nikki. We move on to number 4.
Yes, so number 4 in my memo, or the memo from Tracy and me, is 3317-0202. And so this is about the early voting center approval process. So it's several things happening in this section. It looks like it's a lot of new text. It's mostly moving existing text around with some new text, but so legislation passed this session, laid out some new considerations that the local boards have to use when they're looking at early voting centers. And so what we did is we created in the regulation part A, which is considerations, which is it's including the 5 considerations that are in the 2021 legislation, and then moved 2 considerations that we had elsewhere in the reg up into there. So 1 through 5 in the reg are from the statute, and 6 and 7 were in reg somewhere else. So under considerations, we already had in regulation the requirement that so many voters have to live within so many miles of early voting centers in the county. And so we had a standard set out for 1, 3, and 5, or 1 to 3 and 5. I can't remember what it was, but we had some gaps. We didn't have a population density for counties that had 2 early voting centers, and we didn't have a population density for counties that had 5 or more. So those have been added to this to make a substantive change to that population density, but now they're under considerations under the requirements of the law of the 2021 legislation. And then by creating the requirement, we then created part B, which is the requirement section. So these are things that the early voting centers must be able to do or have. So we have considerations, we have requirements. So the new B are the requirements. These were all listed previously under the old B, which was it was requirements for the content of the form. And so we just took it out of the form requirements, moved it into its own section, and then amended the form requirement, the form section, just saying that the form is going to ask questions that relate to both the requirements and the considerations. So it looks like it's a lot. It really just is incorporating the 2021 legislation, creating a requirement section and a consideration section, so that the local boards can use that in selecting or proposing to the state board their early voting centers. And then there's a lot of renumbering that goes on there as well. But those are the proposed changes to 3317-0202.
Great. Thank you, Nikki. Are there any questions about that? About 33?
Mr. Chairman, I have a question.
Yes.
And the question may be, my question is more on the lines of legislative intent. So Part A, 0.02A, considerations for early voting centers. Are all of these to be equally weighted in consideration? Or how, it was that, is that a, I'm more curious than anything, because we have 7 factors. We've identified them. I'm presuming it's all coming from what the legislature has instructed to be taken into consideration. But was there anything in legislative history, or is there any reason to identify that they shall be equally weighted? Or there can be, you know, if number 5 outweighs everything else. So I don't want to stir up a hornet's nest here. I'm just more curious than anything.
So the first 5 are from legislation. 6 and 7 are from other factors that we've had in existence for as long as we've had early voting. The legislation that created 1 through 5 did not establish a priority. They are listed here in the same order they are in the bill, but there was no, it doesn't say in order of priority. They are all equal. Understanding that you could very well end up with conflicting considerations, that, you know, 2 and 3, you might get people close to dense concentrations, but there's no public transportation, which can be the case in rural counties. So yes, it is a conflict, and we will just work with the local boards to support them and help them establish the best locations that they have. They will all be coming to you. So that is something that the state board approves, and we'll be looking to do that at our December meeting and probably into the January meeting. And we'll be presenting them county by county and try to highlight these which the requirements and then the considerations. But it is, this will be our first time working through these considerations. So I'm sure we'll have some lessons learned after we do that.
Okay. Thank you, Nikki. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Nikki. And just to add to what Nikki said as well, if I might, you know, when we go through this, and Malcolm and I have both been through, you know, this in the past, you will find that often they want to do the considerations, but there's just not one that meets the requirements in the area that's available. It's just not possible. That was made easier in the last election when we were able to use all the high schools, right, which have all basically meet, you know, just about every one of the requirements and the considerations, right? But when we didn't have the high schools before, sometimes it was, you know, you just had to take what you could get because it just wasn't a suitable building available.
And I'd like to just add on to that, because I know that is one of the struggles of the local boards, and I just feel sort of to share their struggles with all of you, is especially for early voting, you're asking a facility to give up whatever else it's supposed to do for 8 consecutive days. And so oftentimes the counties are fortunate enough to be able to use rec centers, you know, that have nice big gyms that they can use. Well, it's June, it's summer camp time. And so it's really a facility. They try very hard to meet all of these considerations, but ultimately it's about, is there a sufficiently sized facility available for 8 consecutive days in June, and then again in October. You'll be, as we present them, we'll be pointing out some of these where maybe the considerations weren't all met, and this is why. And so we'll share that with you as we present them.
It's a great question, though, Sky. Thank you. Any other questions on, I think on number 4, I think, 33.17.02.02, early voting centers. Are there any other questions?
Question, Mr. Chair.
Sure.
I guess Nikki or anyone with more experience than me, which is I guess everyone here, do you have a sense of the number of new voting centers that would come to us for approval? A handful, dozens, multiple, more than that?
So great question. So there might have, the same bill did require several counties to add more. So maybe 10 more. And then the rest as to whether the locations that they've used in the past are available, those kinds of things. I don't think, it's certainly not going to be a majority of early voting centers are coming to you for approval. It'll be the new ones under this bill, which I think is maybe 10, 12, and then a handful of others. If a board's already approved, if a prior board has already approved the early voting centers and nothing changes, we won't bring them back. We will tell you no changes. But we don't review all of them every election. We are asking the local boards to fill out a very short form survey on the ones they expect to continue to use, just to make sure that they have paid attention to these new considerations and are acknowledging that they have taken them into account. But if they haven't changed, we'll just tell you that. But I don't think it's gonna be maybe 20 to 30 centers that we'll be presenting.
Thank you. That's helpful background, I guess. As a related follow-up, I guess the form that I guess will eventually come to us as board members to review and then give a okay or approval to, or is it just more for us, I guess, in our notes before we officially decide separately?
So we haven't in the past provided you with all the information because it's a form, it's pictures, it's a site it's a whole lot of information that can be overwhelming. But what we do is we present you the highlights in a meeting with the requirements that they meet. We will show you the population density and whether they're meeting the population. We'll show you the picture of the facility. We'll show you how they intend to lay it out. So we'll give you enough information along with our recommendation as to whether we think you should approve it or send it back for more discussion. But it's a lot of material that the local boards provide to us for our review.
Okay, I guess I'm just getting at her wondering if we should track the language more precisely. So I looked at the statute where it says a local board shall take into account the following factors, and versus our regulation says a local board shall consider the following. And I get what we're getting at. I'm just wondering if someone were to challenge, I guess, our determination or our approval on the basis of, I don't know, the local board not considering things, but like you said, sometimes it's not a consideration that is applicable if there's no transportation. And so that's all I'm getting at. But if it's not going to be a thing that's ever going to get litigated that harshly, maybe it's not worth overthinking.
Any other questions? And I'll speak to that real quick, Justin. Yeah, just to answer that real quick, I think that there is a difference in both legislation and intent here of consideration versus requirement. And that while the considerations are all something that every board must consider, they don't have to use them based on the reading of the law. I think a plain reading of the law or the code, if they're either conflicting or if there are requirements, the requirements can't be met, if that makes sense. And in practice, having been involved both on the county side and on the state side, everybody does, I mean, just tremendous work. All these local boards do tremendous work in trying to find and meet every requirement and consideration possible. And I think you'll see in the presentations, they're usually in PowerPoint, and they, we'll see the densities, and you'll see the percentage of the population that's in that area and photos of the facility, and you're kind of getting an idea why they chose that. And then you'll get a chance to ask questions. And then part of that question process, you see the consternation that the local boards have gone through, and they said, well, we tried this place and that place and that place, and nobody wants to give up 8 days. So I hope that answers that a little bit for you.
That's helpful. I think that's fine. And yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. I'm thinking through, I guess, in my dealing with local administrative boards, and when there's certain requirements set forth in the regs, and then courts have said there's not enough findings of facts when there wasn't like a specific finding on each issue, when even it was silly because there was no need to make that finding. That's what I was getting at, but I think the process makes sense to me, so I don't want to further tinker with it here.
Are there any other questions or comments on number 4, which is 33.17.02.02, early voting centers? Seeing no other comments, is there a motion to accept the changes as presented?
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
So we have a motion and a second. All those in favor of number 4, which is 33.17.02.02, early voting centers, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Seeing no nays, it has passed unanimously. So we move on to number 5, 33.11.01.04, absentee ballot drop boxes.
Great, thank you. So this proposed regulation incorporates changes of legislation from the 2021 session as well. It's structured in a similar way as the early voting. So we have considerations, which comes from the bill itself. We have requirements, which come from the bill itself. And then we laid out the approval process, which is also defined in the code. So that is a process where the forms are submitted to the state administrator. We've established the timeline in here, a review timeline, and then what happens if the state administrator finds that the proposed location doesn't meet the considerations, that the ability of the state administrator to add additional boxes is also in the legislation. So the details in here are just us setting out the process so everybody knows how much time there is when these forms are due. But it's structured similar to the early voting center proposal process.
Okay. Are there any comments or questions about the ballot drop boxes for absentee ballots? I guess I have a question on the point of information. Should it read, does it still read absentee ballots or is it mail-in ballot?
So we have in regulation just kept absentee because it is throughout. We did have a regulation last month, I believe, that defined mail-in ballot and cross-referenced them. But at this point, because the Constitution uses the word absentee, we're trying to be consistent in the regs, but then also acknowledge that we're using a different phrase in the public.
Thank you. Were there any other questions or comments on ballot drop box regulation proposal? Seeing no comments, the chair will entertain a motion to accept the proposed regulation changes as presented.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Passes unanimously. So we move on to the approval of the final changes, which are things we've already voted on that have been to ALR in the legislature and have come back for final approval. Who will be taking care of that?
That's correct, I will. So in your materials, you have a memo from me dated September 17th. And it outlines the 6 proposed regulations that have gone out for public comment and are now before you for final adoption. They were published in the August 13th edition of the Maryland Register. We did not get any public comments. But as Tracy said, when she introduced the proposed regs, we had run these through the Mayo Regulation Committee beforehand and incorporated any comments from that process. So there are 6 of them. I'll just summarize them quickly. Number 1 and 3 in my memo incorporate requirements of 2021 legislation. 2, 5, and 6 are updating regulations that should have been updated before for prior legislation that we just missed in updating them. Number 4 in the memo is the codifying the signature cure requirement that we put in place last election, so that if I returned my mail-in ballot without a signature, that the local board was required to reach out to me to try to get me to sign it. So this would make that codifying a past practice. And number 6 also is aligning a regulation with the state board's existing contingency policy, which we will be presenting to you for 2022, but it's making the changes that are already in the policy. Again, we didn't receive any public comments, and these are before you for final adoption.
So any comments or questions about any of the proposed items for final adoption? Seeing no comments or questions, the chair would entertain a motion to approve all 6 of these proposed changes as presented.
So moved.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second, Mr. Chairman.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Passes unanimously. Thank you, Nikki. I appreciate it very much.
Thank
So
you.
now we move on to the confidentiality form that everyone has received a copy of.
Yes. Thank you. So in front of you is a confidentiality request form. So this is for voters to basically protect from public disclosure their residential address from on voter registration lists, but also on candidate filings, and if they're a responsible officer, their address for political committees as well. The form itself is divided into the 5 categories for which they're allowed to check a box and supply proof within that category. Additionally, we kind of streamlined it a little bit more. There's a couple of questions that were confusing to on the old forms here, but were basically for board use only. So instead of having that information on the actual form for the individual to check off if they're a candidate or not, we put it in for board use only. So when these forms come in, they'll go to the voter registration division first. So because everyone's a registered voter and that's seeking this. And then from there, it'll be processed and then it will be sent over to the Candidacy and Campaign Finance division to see if if the individual was a candidate or a responsible officer. And if so, then we would process it. But so that question that was confusing on the past there, are you a candidate, is now gone. So basically we've streamlined it so that these are the 5 categories and what they have to supply documentation wise for it to be approved, and a little bit for any relevant information that they wish to add to their request. They have to sign it and date it. But the form is for your approval now, if there's any questions.
Great. Anyone have any questions or comments as to the form for confidentiality request? I'm sure everyone has had a chance to review that. So are there anybody see any problems with the form or any comments you'd like to make on it? Seeing no comment, of course, the chair would entertain a motion to approve the form as presented.
So
So
moved.
moved.
So we have a motion and we'll take Mr. Miller's as a second. And all those in favor of approving the form as presented signify by saying aye.
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 So I believe we have the, Mr. Fund, did you vote? Malcolm, did you vote?
I said aye.
you're-
Yes. Aye.
You were muted. Okay, got it. All right, great. Thank you. It passes unanimously. Thank you. So now we move on to the approval of administrative closures.
Yes, we have 2 accounts that are, I would say, eligible for closure. Take Back Maryland PAC and Jeffrey Thames Committee. They have gone through the necessary, I would say, actions with the state prosecutor's office, trying to get compliance, and either they have not been able to serve citations or they found out the individuals are no longer in the state. The state prosecutor's office has recommended closure and will not enforce any more actions against these two committees. So we would recommend that the board close them for, I would say, extraordinary circumstances here, and that they would just get off our books so we don't have to keep on referring them up to the state prosecutor's office when they fail to file reports. If there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Does anyone have any questions about either the process or either of the two requests to administratively close accounts? I have a question, Jared. Like this first one that I'm looking at has a bank balance and a cash balance. Will the state move to confiscate that bank balance?
So in my conversations with the state prosecutor's office about that, they don't think that that balance exists, since they have not filed a campaign finance report since 2015 and have gone into the bank and with fees. It believes that it's just been gone. The individuals also moved out of state, and they will not prosecute any of that. So yes, I also wanted to make sure that if there was a cash balance, that's one of the things that always holds me up for asking for administrative closures, is that if there's any sort of surplus funds, what happened to those funds and the disposition of them, just in case there was any theft. And basically, from what I've gathered from the state prosecutor's office, that they're satisfied with the outcome of not seeking any sort of criminal or civil actions against the responsible officers.
Another question that I have is, I know we had this conversation, it might be a year ago, where when we have someone like this and we close their accounts, which we're prepared to do today, and like they would like resurface in a couple of years and then open up another account and just start. Did we ever find out if we have a mechanism that we can use to keep those people until they, I know there's a statute of limitation, but that also doesn't mean we let them do it again. Is there any mechanism we have to stop that?
Once we've administratively closed the accounts, no, because the account is closed and the fines are basically waived at that point there, which is why we kind of wait. There is a statute that allows us to collect for 5 years. So as you can see here, most of this stuff here is past 2015. And so we believe that this individual, based upon, I would say, the state prosecutor, that they have left the state and are not going to return to the state on this. So, and the late filings against Take Back Maryland were in 16, 15, and 14. So even if we did the 5 years look back, it would, if the individual came in 22 to file for office, we couldn't even get it on under our statute, which is why we kind of waited until the 5 years were officially up.
Okay, thank you very much. Does anyone else have any questions or comments? So the chair would entertain a motion to administratively close the two entities, Take Back Maryland PAC, and maybe Jared, you can help me with the other one.
Jeffrey Thames. Thames, yes. Friends of
Yes, so
Jeffrey.
the Friends of Jeffrey Thames, or Thames if you're from England, right?
Right.
And so the chair would entertain a motion to administratively close those two accounts.
So moved.
So
Motion
moved,
from the
Mr. Chair.
floor. And we'll credit Mr. Fun with the second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Passes unanimously. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now we move on to your request to approve Title 14 waivers.
Yes, thank you. And we have one request for your approval, which is Vistra Energy Corporation, and the other one, which was M&E Sales, which was denied, which is just for your edification. The Vistra Energy Corp had duplicate accounts in the system, and basically the information was filed. This was just like I said, is a duplicate account, and we just wanted to close it out and be done with it. So all the information was filed under their correct parent corporation. So we recommend that they can close this one and wait. Once we waive the late fees, it will be closed.
Great. Okay. Are there any questions or discussion? Would anyone like to make a motion for the waiver for Vistra Energy Corp? Motion to approve the waiver for Vistra Energy Corp.
Moved.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
A motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 And we again have a unanimous approval.
Great, thank you.
Chair, do you have anything else, or does that conclude your parts?
That concludes my business for today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we move on to see if there's any old business. Is there any old business? Seeing none, we move on to new business. And what I'd like to do is see if there's any other new business first. And then if not, we would take the Mayo proposal, the last item of new business. Is there any other new business to look at today? Seeing no other new business, let's move on to the Mayo proposal. Who will be presenting?
I'm going to have to click start broadcast in order to unmute him, so ignore that message when you hear it.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
All right, David, it's unmuted. Thank you. Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
We can hear you fine. Can you hear us?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. The floor is yours.
All right, thank you. Everyone should have a copy of our presentation in their materials. We had a PowerPoint that we prepared. Thank you for your time. My name is David Garris. I'm the president of the Maryland Association of Election Officials, also the acting director of Anne Arundel County. I have with me today Rui Lavoie, the vice president of the Maryland Association of Election Officials and the director of Cecil County. So to give you an introduction, what we're presenting is the culmination of a 6-year project to reclassify the state employees. The reclassification of the staff was completed during the last term. Bill and Malcolm, you may be familiar with some of this material, and for the other newer folks, what we've done is we reviewed the election series job classifications with Maryland Association of Election Officials Personnel Committee, the Department of Budget Management, and the State Board of Elections Personnel Services Division. As part of this process, we reviewed the director and deputy director job specifications We updated them. We updated the minimum qualifications for becoming an election director to include possessing a bachelor's degree. We updated the technology that was referred to in the job descriptions. It used to be some pretty antique stuff. We've also added the newer processes and projects because what we did is we created a project management framework for the election positions. Additionally, we noted that the time commitment for these positions has increased, including additional early voting hours, more requirements for successfully administering election, and as a designated critical infrastructure agency, we're also on duty for emergencies, as well as having a much higher security profile than we've had in the past. So we have two recommendations for the board that we'd like your approval for. The first is to adjust the salary bands for election directors and deputy directors by 2 grades. We can review that on the next slide. And also your approval of a 2-grade adjustment for current election directors and deputy directors, due primarily to the higher job qualifications and requirements, new job duties and projects, the increasingly sophisticated and multifaceted nature of the modern election management, and the nearly 10 years since the previous salary adjustment. We'll note that this request is in line with DBM's recommended 12% salary adjustment for reclassifications within the same classification series, and aligns with the increase approved for Board of Election staff that was approved in the previous term. So this has all been a part of a continuous process, and this is the culmination of that process. So to address the first aspect of our recommendations, adjusting the director and deputy director and director salary bands. So what you see on the page with the number 1 on it is the band that we propose in gray highlight for each position: Director 1, Director 2, Director 3, a Deputy Director 2, 1, 2, and 3. And underneath that in italics, you can see what the current band is. So what we have is there are currently staff with higher grade classifications than deputy directors that are their immediate supervisor. So completing the grade adjustments is necessary to resolve this issue. So Rui can expand on this if you want, but basically you have folks who are at or greater than the grade of their immediate supervisor, who's a deputy director. So that's why the bands need to be adjusted. And then our next slide about the bands is when they would be in effect. For Director 1, grade 21 would be less than 49,000 registered voters. Grade 22 would be 50,000 to 99,000 registered voters. For Director 2, a grade 23 would be 100,000 to 199,000 registered voters. A grade 24 would be 200,000 to 299,000. And then a Director 3 would be a grade 25, which would be 30,000 to 399,000 voters, and a grade 26, which would be 400,000 and above. And then the salary classifications are based on the number of active registered voters in a jurisdiction, and it does not include inactive voters or overall eligible voting age population. And then on the second request or recommendation that we had for the director and deputy director salary adjustment, a 2-grade increase adjustment for each director and deputy, retroactive to July 1st, 2021. Each election director from the local boards in the state personnel system has provided a letter certifying funds are available for this in the FY22 budget, and the funding certification letters are available for your review if you would like. And then the reasons for our support: demands for election officials are at an all-time high. Adjusting the grades for these positions will match the increased responsibilities, duties, and expectations. As you're aware, the pay scale for election officials is lower than that of other agency leaders and department heads. The failure to address this issue is going to result in a brain drain of talent and leadership from the Maryland community as directors retire or take new positions in other fields. To this point, following the 2020 election, 25% of the election directors in Maryland, including 3 from the largest jurisdictions, have retired. That includes my immediate boss, Joe Torrey, who you might have known, as well as other directors who have not yet announced their retirement, but who have said that they're probably going to put in their papers before the end of the year. So that's 25% right now. As you are probably aware, many of the processes that come with running and administering an election are on-the-job training. The loss of so much institutional knowledge in key positions at a single time is going to be a pretty significant challenge for Maryland going forward. So competitive salaries are essential to retaining experienced election officials and attracting talented newcomers who can assume these positions. And the current deputy director grades represent a demotion for certain staff, and that limits the pool of people who would be interested in applying for those positions, because the deputy directors are at times earning less than their subordinate employees. As we know, they're currently staff with higher grade classifications than the deputies who are their immediate superiors. Other reasons for your support is these proposals are the culmination of a long-running project and are an excellent opportunity to demonstrate the support that you have for the election officials in their field, for their work and their dedication. We're also dealing with elevated threat levels towards election officials and increase in stress and anxiety, which has negatively impacted morale and job satisfaction, positive mental health for many directors. The Maryland Department of Budget and Management was instrumental in developing the new director and deputy director job classifications and approved the qualifications and grade match several years ago. The new job specifications and qualifications have been in use since April 2019. So this is bringing the grades in line with the job descriptions that we're already using. And during the meeting with the State Board of Elections in Mayo, regarding the new election series, we were advised the best process for getting everything completed was to break the project into different steps. The first being the staff, which we've taken care of, so to speak, with the previous board, and now we're trying to bring the project to a successful conclusion by addressing the directors and the deputies. Additional reasons for your support. Funding adjustments have already been approved by each county and are available in the FY22 budget. Therefore, the budget request is neutral. It is budget neutral because the funding already exists. Everything's already approved. Just the last step of this would be the approval of the State Board of Elections. And we request the adjustments be retroactive to July 1st, 2021. And then we also included in our materials a slide with a timeline on it in case you want to see the progression of this project. But just as a note, the grade adjustment plan for directors and deputy directors has been consistent since 2017. So we're just trying to bring to a conclusion this project, and we look for your support. And we're happy to take any questions or comments that you'd like to put to us. And Rui, is there anything that you'd like to add?
Hi, everyone. No, thank you, David, unless someone has a question for me. And Mr. Chairman, I think you were muted when you were talking, so we didn't hear you.
Yes, thank you. Second time. I'm getting over a little cough and I don't want to cough while someone's presenting. Thank you very much. What I'd like to do now is open it up to any public comments. What we may do, we have a closed session to go into to deal with some other personnel matters. So what we may do is I can take a few questions or any comments now, and then we can finish up our business, go into closed session, and then come back and reopen our open session and come back into this new business to take a vote when we get some other data that we cannot share in a public forum. So are there any initial questions for either of our illustrious Mayo representatives?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I don't have any questions at the moment. I just wanted to express my gratitude that the slide presentation is quite helpful. And for those of us new to the board without any prior experience with these issues, I found it to be very helpful. And I just wanted to make that record.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Any other comments or questions before we, what I would propose is, again, if any more comments, questions, then we would move on through number 13 and 14 of our agenda. We would move into closed session, and then today we would come back for public session and reopen right here where we would leave off with any more comments or questions, and then be able to, at that time, get the recommendation from our state administrator on this as well. But there is some data that cannot be shared publicly that we need to go over in a private session having to do with individual payrolls. So are there any other general questions before we move on and then come back? So I'd ask you, David and Rui, not to go anywhere, because we will come back. We will come back here for that.
Yeah, that's fine.
Are there any other questions at this point or comments for Rui or David? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to move on to disclosure of campaign contributions. Does anybody have any campaign contributions to disclose?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
Hoya Bull Roast, $20.
Okay.
Hoya Bull Roast, $20. Big bucks.
Big bucks. Anyone else? Seeing none, let's move to the schedule of the next meeting. I do have some proposed changes to our dates so that everyone knows. Historically, we combine our November and December meetings due to the holidays and all of the conflicts that go on there, and usually have one meeting in December and combine the November and December timeframes. So my proposal, if you all are okay with this, is to not meet in November and then have a December meeting on December 16th. Same time, same method. So that would be December 16th, 2021. And then in January, because of some dates that are important in January on where we have to have some approvals done, that for next year, I promised I wasn't going to say the year when I said this, so because that's scary. But January 20th would be the January meeting for next year. So again, it would be December 16th, 2 p.m. and then January 20th, 2 p.m. Board member have a problem with that schedule? Sky, if you're trying to talk, you're muted.
Sorry. Okay. Sorry.
Yep.
December 16, I hope very much that I can participate in that one. I currently have a jury trial scheduled in Montgomery County Circuit Court that starts on the 13th. We're only scheduled for 3 days. I'm doing what I can to resolve the case, but if my trial were to slop over a little bit, I could have a conflict with the 16th. I would not suggest that we move it on my behalf, though. More importantly, the January meeting, I am out of the country for the entire month of January. If my Wi-Fi will work, the timing of that meeting at 2 p.m. is one that I can participate in. But at the moment, you'll probably have to presume me to be absent in January. And I apologize for that because I obviously have just heard in this meeting the amount of work that we need to do for these, the local boards and their early voting centers and all our other business. So anyway, I don't want to be the weak link here, but full disclosure where I am and my availability December, January.
Okay, great. Thank you. Any other board members have any problem with those dates? So I think there is no good date for you, Sky, in January for sure. And you know, based on the schedule, you're probably going to be available in December.
Cool. Yeah, that's awesome.
I think I will probably be available in December, even if I'm just coming off of my 3-day jury trial.
Okay.
But presume that I'm available on the 16th. Presume I will not be available on the 20th of January, but I will make every effort to be available on the 20th of January.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so we've set those next 2 meetings because I don't see any other board members with issues. So it's important that everyone please attend those 2 meetings, because in the event that Sky is not at either one of them, we would not have the sufficient 4 votes to take a vote. So that would be very important. Okay, so now we will come back. I'm going to read a meeting script. So the board will now consider whether to meet in closed session to discuss the compensation of employees over whom the board has salary setting authority as permitted under section 3-305B1 of the general provisions article. This exemption applies to a discussion among the members of the board regarding a personnel matter that affects a specific individual. Meeting in closed session will allow the members of the board to be briefed on personnel matters and share their views without compromising the confidentiality of those discussions. May I have a second? May I have a motion to meet in closed session?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
So all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 So the motion
Aye.
having passed, the board will meet in closed session in accordance with exemption B1 of section 3-305 of the Open Meetings Act. We will be back today. Normally, often we've closed and not come back to close the meeting. We will come back and reopen as soon as we're done the closed meeting. I would like to convene this meeting in about 5 minutes. Does that work for everybody? So about 3:46. Does that time work for everybody? Does anybody need more time than that? I want to be sensitive. I know there's people here waiting for the meeting again. So we'll talk to everybody in about 5 minutes. Thank you very much. And then we'll other new business. So after this piece of new business is concluded, whether it's either voted up, down, or tabled, whatever the occasion, we will then, the next item will be adjourned.
I will try to call Malcolm and see if he's having any troubles.
Great, thank you. I was just getting ready to pick up the phone there when Nikki said that. Malcolm?
Yes, yes, I can hear you. Thank you.
Great. Okay, so we will.
I'm still working on the computer. If it comes up, I'll come on back up.
We would love to see your beautiful face, but if not,
Yeah, all right.
we will we'll work with your voice. So let's reopen the meeting, and what I guess we should start with is, so just to recap, we have a request made by Mayo for dealing with a step and grade increase for deputy directors and directors. And we should start, I guess, with the administrator's recommendation. So let me ask first, just to complete the recap, Mr. Garris, would you please tell us exactly what the request is?
Sure. We have two requests. Request number one is to adjust the salary bands for election directors and deputy directors by 2 grades per band. And then request two is to approve a 2-grade adjustment for current election directors and deputy directors.
Mr. Chairman, may I add something?
Yes.
So that is the request, but I just would like I know it was mentioned in the presentation, but I think it's important for the new board members to know that this request is not a new request. The grade adjustments have been in the plan all along for the past over 5 years. And we were told to complete the staff reclassifications into the new series and circle back to the deputies and directors. So we've done everything that we have been asked to do since this plan was first formulated, when DBM agreed that the grades matched the job descriptions and the qualifications. And nothing has changed on that. It's still the same request from the same chart from over 5 years ago.
Thank you. I think there's another request that you're looking for that to be retroactive. Is that correct?
Yeah, as part of the 2-grade adjustment for election directors and deputy directors, we request it be retroactive to July 1st, 2021, the start of the fiscal year.
Okay, so maybe I'm a little confused. What's the difference in request 1 and request 2? Explain to me the difference again. Maybe I'm a little
So
thick.
request 1 is changing the band. So right now, currently, a director 1 is a grade 19-20. We would propose making it a 21-22. If you look at the slide number 4 in our presentation,
Yes.
that summarizes the salary band. So
okay,
it would move the director 1's up 21-22, director 2's 23-24, director 3's 25-26. And then the deputies, the 1s would be 17-18, the 2s would be 19-20, and the deputy 3s would be 21-22. And then the slide after that, it breaks down the voter registration for each grade in the band. So if you're election director 1 and your county has less than 49,000 voters, then you'd be a grade 21. Conversely, if you were an election director 3 and your county had over 400,000 voters, then you'd be a grade 26. And
okay, so I understand now. Does everybody in the board understand the 2 requests that have been made? The retroactive part is attached to request number 2. Did anyone on the board have any preliminary questions for Mr. Garris or Ms. Lavoie on representing Mayo on those 2 requests?
Mr. Chair, question.
Yes.
I think it was Ms. Lavoie. You said it was the plan all along, so forgive me because I'm a recent member of the board. So whose plan has this been, and all along, or what, can you give me more background, please?
Yes, sir, Mr. Williams. So the Mayo Personnel Committee worked with the state board HR director at that time and the Department of Budget Management, 2 members from the Department of Budget Management, to rewrite the program management election series. Previously, there was just a few different election series positions, and they rewrote it to better fit what election officials across the state were doing in their job duties. And the Department of Budget and Management, again, along with State Board HR, determined the grade match to match those job qualifications and duties. What happened was in March of 2019, DB State Board approved the qualifications and the additional qualifications and additional job duties for directors and deputies. And then in April of 2019, the Department of Management approved those. They were posted on the website, and directors and deputies have been hired under those higher qualifications and job duties, but the grades were never increased. And what we were told, there was some there was delays due to, it was all kinds of reasons why there were delays on this, on taking the action. But what we were told when the new HR director came to State Board, myself and Alicia Alexander, the director of PG County, she was the then vice president of Mayo, and I was the secretary of Mayo. We met with Miss Lamone and Miss Charlson and Miss Malcolm, the new HR director, and they everyone agreed that we were going to present to the State Board the staff reclassifications into the new series, and then we would circle back to the directors after that was completed. The State Board at that time, the 5-member board, approved the staff reclassifications to be effective July 1st of 2020. Because of COVID and everything that's happened, as you know, in the last year, there was a delay in us circling back, so now we're circling back. So when I said nothing's changed, it's the same grade increases or adjustments that were needed 6 years ago when the chart was made. Right now, we have staff that are higher grades than deputy directors, and even in my county, there's staff higher than my deputy director position is vacant because it's difficult to hire a deputy director who will supervise somebody that's currently a higher grade. So that's why we're trying to circle back and just wrap up the plan that was started like 6 years ago.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions, preliminary questions?
I guess the preliminary
Okay.
question for either the staff or I guess anyone who can inform me, just so the proposed grade on the slide from Mayo has the grade 21, for example, registered voters of less than 50,000. Is there the current grades in place as of now? Do they have similar standards at all, or is it the I guess more less defined?
No, great question. And the answer is yes. The current grades are using the same voter registration standards to figure out where you lie on the band. So we're taking that same band system and just moving it from its current state to the new grades. But the voter registration standards, if you're a deputy director, grade 1, election director 1, grade 19, you are currently in a county with less than 49,999 voters.
Thanks.
Thank you. And any other preliminary questions? So now, I guess the next obvious place to go is to the state administrator to give her recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I'd like to correct something that was in the Mayo presentation about the staff salary increases. They had asked similarly then for 12%, and what I approved and you ratified was a 6% increase. I've forgotten what year it was. And my recommendation is similar for the election directors and deputy directors, that it be in essence a 6% salary increase with an effective date of January 1, 2022.
So if I could I just want to clarify, would that be under their ask in number 1 or number 2? Would it be an adjustment in grade, or I'm a little confused?
Nikki, help me out here. I don't.
So they've asked for the 2 different things. Number 1 was a 2 director and deputy director salary bands, which was adjusting the salary bands. And number 2 was a director and deputy director grade adjustment. So they've asked for a grade adjustment. Mr. Garys, am I correct in that? And then also a salary band adjustment.
Correct. The salary bands need to be corrected in order to fix the issue that directors such as Rui are having, where staff would be at a higher grade than the deputy director who would be supervising them. So that's issue one, that's what the grade fixes. And then the 12% goes back and, as we noted, it's budget neutral because the 12% is already in everyone's approved budgets. So if you don't approve the 12% and the 6%, and you do approve the 6%, then the other 6% is just going to sit in everyone's budget.
I'm sure you'll find some use for it.
So I'd also like to point that.
Always.
Right, that's very true. I'd also like to note that the Charmaine, the Human Resource Director, gave us a document that outlined the DBM standard when people are being reclassed or being changing in the same classification. So the staff, the norm for the staff to be reclassed into a new series was 6%. That was the norm for DBM. But when somebody's already in the series, as we have been since April of 2019, and the grade goes up 2 grades, the norm is 12%, not 6%.
So if I can jump in and answer, I think Linda's question, I think the proposal one, the request one, is a request for that the bands move up 2 grades. And so 6% is 1 grade. So it would be moving the bands up 1 grade. The request two is a 2 grade adjustment for each director and deputy, which Linda's proposal is a 1 grade. I'm not sure I understand the difference between 1 and 2, but if we're breaking it out that way, 1 would be a 1 grade band increase. Request 2 would be a 1 grade adjustment for each director and deputy director with the effective date that she gave. I think that's right. I don't think Charmaine is listening, but I don't think can call in and speak. So if I have that wrong, Charmaine, just send me a chat and I'll correct it.
So I'm just going to repeat that back just to see if I got it right, because I'm not sure. So then Linda's proposal, so Mayo's ask is for a 2 grade adjustment of the bands, request 1. Request 2 is a 2 grade adjustment of deputy and election directors with an effective date of July 1st, retroactive. And Linda's recommendation, the director's recommendation, is a 1 grade of number 1 adjustment and a 1 grade of number 2 adjustment directly to the ED, the election directors and the deputy directors with an effective date of January 1st. For both of these, or just for the one is January 1st?
For both.
Okay. So both the 1 grade number 1 adjustment and the 1 grade number 2 adjustment, your proposal is that they would be effective 1/1/2022. Okay. And I think I said all that right, didn't I?
That's my understanding, and Charmaine has
Okay.
said it. That's correct.
So I will now open it up for questions for either the election director or for Mayo from any board member.
I guess the question for the administrator is, maybe I missed the rationale for the recommendation.
Well, one of the things I have to keep in mind is the big picture. And part of the big picture is the staff, my staff. And if we were to grant the request as proposed, there would be people at the local boards who make considerable amount more money than a lot of my staff do. And the morale issue, everybody knows what everybody else makes. God knows how it gets out, but they do. And the impact on the morale at my office is huge, and it's just simply not fair. Now, there's been some chat among some of the members of the board about trying to get that changed so that the salary schedule for the state board employees, my staff, would be within the state board's purview rather than the Department of Personnel and or Budget and Management. I think that's a great idea. I don't know how successful that legislative effort will be. But I really have to take into consideration the impact on the staff in my office when we're considering all the other things involved. And a lot of the people that are, and just to be very frank with you, a lot of the local election directors have gotten considerable salary adjustments in the last couple of years. And not all of them, but a lot of them. And I just think that the 6% is better reflective of what the entire situation calls for. And I think it's consistent with what the local Board of Election staff received, 2 years ago. So it's fair, probably more than fair.
Thank you. Does that answer your question, Justin?
Yes, thank you.
I think Ms. Woodward had a question next.
I did have the same question that my colleague had about rationale, which leads me to a question, which is, do we as the board have the authority to identify a different percentage? For example, if the election director is recommending 6% and Mayo is recommending 12%, but if we were to say 9%, halfway between those two numbers, 3% up, 3% down, do we have the authority to choose a different number? And that perhaps is a question for our council.
Mr. Trento.
That's an excellent question, Ms. Woodward. Thank you, Mr. Velp. That is something I am looking at. It's not something I'm prepared to opine on right now. It's sort of a statutory construction question. I think under any reading of the statute, the board can decide to reject the state administrator's recommendation and encourage the state administrator to make a different recommendation that the board would find more acceptable. And at that point, then the board can vote up or down on that different recommendation. What I'm not prepared to advise one way or the other on is whether I understand the statute to mean that the board has authority to take the state administrator's recommendation, reject it, and instead make an alternative determination as to what the board believes would be an appropriate compensation amount.
Great question, and thank you. Any other questions or comments?
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, I do have another question related to the rationale. This goes to rather than the retroactive July 1, 2021, what is the rationale for a January 1, 2022 for any adjustment that would be made?
I believe it's consistent with what we've done in the past. Maybe Charmaine can text Nikki and let her know, but I think that's what the decision was with regard to the staff salary increase. That's my recollection.
I had a point of, so I can understand something here, might help us all. And maybe this question is as much for Mr. Garris is request number 1 and request number 2, are they cumulative? So would it in effect be a 24% increase to some people?
No, it would be, because each time you go up the band, or each time you go up a grade, I believe it's 6% from grade to grade. Because remember, the folks that are, like for instance, when Joe was here, Joe was a 24, so Joe would go from a 24 to a 26. Or.
But how is that different, number 1 versus number 2? Maybe I'm just too dense.
Because number 1 is changing what you recruit at. So right now, the current salary range for Director 1 is grade 19/20. So it's 57 to 99.
Okay.
What number 1 would do is change the salary range for Director 1 to 65 to 112 if you stayed there for 30 years as a Director 1, and so on and so forth, all the way down the line.
So you're saying request number 1 would not necessarily change the salary of any director or deputy director?
Correct.
That's already serving.
Correct, because what number 1 is basically doing is just changing the salary range for these positions.
Okay.
It makes the salaries more competitive, and it also fixes the problem that the lower deputy directors are having with their positions being lower than some of the staff that they supervise.
And then number 2 would effectively be the 2-grade increase for everybody who's already serving is the request.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments?
Ms. Woodbury, any more questions for you before I jump in again?
Please.
So forgive me for this, probably a basic question that I would have to have more experience would know, just the prior history or how often there were the pay increases in the past. I think Ms. Simone mentioned there were prior increases. Was it systemized, or was it sort of just over the past couple of years that local boards would present a request for their specific deputy or director? Or was this
the background for that was there were directors and deputies who were hired, and they were informed that 12% was or 6% was the maximum that they could be hired, because, for instance, when they were hired, like I was hired as a election clerk lead advance and then moved to a deputy director. And I was told erroneously at the time that there was a limit, there was a cap on how much I could be compensated. So I accepted that cap when I was hired because that's what I knew to be true. And then that turned out not to be true. So on a case-by-case basis, in order to correct that error that had happened with some directors, the boards went to SBE and said, if we had known about this at the time, this is what we actually would have paid this person when we hired them. So in order to correct that, that's why some directors got a raise, but it wasn't due to, great performance or anything. It was due to correcting that issue that had not with Charmaine, but with a different HR director.
And so if I could jump into, so that was known, that was the assumption throughout state government. Like I came from a different state agency, and that was what we understood the rule to be as well. So it was not just limited to election officials or the local boards. It was just sort of generally known that this is what you're capped at. And so David's right. These one-time salary adjustments are to make up for that rule that turned out not to, to have exceptions. The other time all of us that are state employees get raises is when the governor and the legislature decide to give state employees raises or COLAs. And so we have received those, all of our community who are state employees have received those in addition to these one-time salary adjustments that have been requested by the individual local boards.
Thank you. And then I guess, but annual, so with the fixed rate, I guess in the step scale, is this, people just get raises, is it annually or just when they're up for a new step increase based on just seniority? Or is there anything else?
So like when the governor and the legislature give every state employee a step increase. So we just move from step 10 to 11 or 1 to 2, whatever you are, you go up a step. If they give a COLA, it's a percentage. So that just gets added to the whole scale. You stay your same step, but your salary's gone up by that percentage. The salary adjustments that David was talking about, that was a specific request from the local board. Please move this person from grade 3 to 5, grade 3 to 7, whatever the request was, that was moving up. Generally, the request was more than one. So it's a couple different things depending on how it was executed. But generally, the ones across the board are a one-step increase, and it's not every year. It depends on the budget. It's not a guarantee that the governor and the legislature agree to give state employees a step every year.
Thank you.
Yeah, great questions. Thank you. Any other questions for either the staff or for Mayo? So I think we have I guess a few ways to go as a board. And number one would be to vote to accept the recommendation of the state administrator. And number two would be to table the issue until we find out from our attorney what the possibilities are as the closer reading of the code and the law. Or I guess we could also vote I think I'm understanding all this correctly, we could vote to say no and go back and say reconsider, if the state administrator would reconsider her recommendation. I think that's the three choices before me. I'm going to ask Mr. Trento if I've summarized that correctly.
That sounds right, Mr. Chairman.
So I'm open to whatever conversation the board would like to have around those three options. And also, if you need more information, please ask questions to either our state administrator or to Mayo. Do I have any board members have any inclination on the way they would like to vote on that?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I think that the threshold issue of what our options are is critical enough that I would probably vote to table this pending advice from Mr. Trento. And my thinking is that without expressing a real opinion on whether or not to just straight up accept the administrator's recommendation, which is certainly a reasonable course. If we wanted to tinker at the edges at all, or even in a greater way, it'd be nice to know whether we have that opportunity before we make a decision.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Miller. I appreciate that. Anyone else like to voice their opinion?
Mr. Chairman, let me weigh in. I'm in agreement with Mr. Miller to what I think is his recommendation, which would be to table this until we can receive information from our council about our ability to take a different approach as it relates to the numbers, the percentages, and/or the timing. So that's where my inclination is. But I do just want to make an overarching comment. And I don't, obviously there's a tension between how our local boards, or there appears to me to be a tension between how our local boards and their administrators and staff and how their salaries come about and how they are teed up for approval by the board. And the difference with where our State Board of Elections staff and where their salaries and how they're teed up. And obviously we can't deal with this at this moment. It's a bigger issue, but I think that it's worth keeping on a discussion or figuring out when to talk about it, what our role can be or needs to be to reduce that tension. I'm troubled that that recommendations, well, what troubles me is that there isn't some parity between where our State Board of Elections employees find themselves and how their salaries are increased or approved, and the local boards as well. And it seems as if there's been a discussion about this. It's beyond this board, I believe. Perhaps it's a legislative issue. I really don't know. But there's a tension, and it just bothers me that recommendations are being made for our local folks to have what appear to be a reasonable basis for these increases. And yet we have to somehow balance that with our state board employees working equally hard and having to even things out a bit. And this is, anyway, a very inarticulate expression of my concern here, which is why I did raise the consideration of whether or not, as a board, we would have the ability to make some different number adjustments, performance adjustments. So that's, again, that's just my inarticulate comment about some tension that I perceive, and it would be good to, at some point, ameliorate that so that the locals versus the state wouldn't be somehow in, again, competition or tension about salaries for hard work being done by all.
Thank you. Wholeheartedly agree with that. How about either Mr. Williams or Mr. Fund? Can we hear from you where your head is at this moment?
I would tend to agree with my other two colleagues. I think this is a bigger issue than what's before us presently. And there's somewhere we can coordinate the two entities in salary, as well as look at things to make it more equitable for both. And I know that's not the proper solution. Plus, we need to hear from council as to what our options are. What can we do? What can we not do? And how can we go about it? I feel I need additional information because I'm looking at this proposal here and, the two recommendations and the two counter recommendations. And I just need more information and a little bit more time. I hate to kick the can down the road, but that's where I stand presently.
I guess echo Sky's comments about and Malcolm's about being comfortable in this position. And I guess it's additionally uncomfortable for me as a newer member, not having enough exposure to the full compensation process, but it feels uncomfortable being in a position to weigh on a compensation, but only in one direction if it's only based on the recommendation of the administrator. And as the board, it would seem that we would be the ultimate arbiter. But I makes sense that we should wait to get better guidance there. I also think, I guess on top of suggesting, it seems like the administrator and Mayo are in accord that legislative fix could be supported here. And so maybe that's like one, I guess, piece of advice maybe we're giving informally. My other thinking is also if there's any way, and it sounds like there probably isn't, the difference between across the board increase versus something more particularized is based on the local board evaluation of their specific deputy director and election director or something else, because I recognize the last election cycle, people worked their tails off and pulled off a great election, but then I guess I'm sure it wasn't equal performance across the board. And maybe there should be a way to have some, award better performance. So I guess that's a long way of saying, I guess I would support something we have a majority to table until we get more guidance.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It certainly sounds to me like we have, and I stand in agreement with all of my colleagues that, we will do it by formal vote to table this until the December meeting. I think that's the wisest course of action. I agree with you all. I think we should know exactly how to handle things like this in general. So I would entertain a motion to table this until the next meeting.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
So we, all those in favor of tabling the Mayo request and the recommendation from the election director until the next meeting signify by saying aye.
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 So it passes unanimously. We will take this up again in the next meeting. So our next motion I'm looking for is a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Yeah. Second.
And seconded. All
Second.
those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. I will talk to some of you before and see most of, or all of you, I believe, in December. Well, so have
Have a good Thanksgiving, everyone.
everybody happy Thanksgiving. Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Happy Thanksgiving.
Be blessed. Thank you.